Hi, Chris with Earthsea Worst here, and today I'm going to show you how to do an underwater splice. So the equipment that we're going to be dealing with in today's video is going to include, of course, the wire, in which today we're going to be dealing with size 12 wire. We've got a size 14 wire coming out of this 1/2 horsepower motor, and we're splicing that to size 12 wire, flat jacketed, double encased submersible pump cable. Additionally, we have a 4-wire splice kit. This is an Earthsea Worst brand, model SP4C wire splice kit. It includes 4 heat shrink tubes as well as 4 butt splice connectors. We've got some electrical tape, a razor knife, a crimping tool, a wire stripper, and then our propane torch. Now, if you don't have a propane torch handy, you can potentially use a heat gun or some other heat source, but keep in mind that the hotter it is, the quicker you're going to be able to get the job done. So I recommend a torch, but I've seen someone do it with a lighter, which is an unfortunate situation because it takes forever. So anyways, let's just get started on doing the splice. So the first thing that we're going to need to do with our cable, now I'll reposition this here. So the first thing we're going to need to do is clear up some room and peel back the double casing here so that we can actually work with these wires. Now these heat shrink tubes are probably 3 inches long or so. So we're going to want to peel back the wire at least as long as those, but we'll go a little bit farther back than that. So to do that, we'll just take our razor knife and score it. And you want to be really cautious not to go all the way through, because you run the risk of hitting the wires inside and damaging the insulation. And typically I'll just kind of make a couple of shallow passes to ensure that I don't run the risk of damaging the insulation. And what I'm doing here is just kind of checking how deep my score is. Now you can kind of feel it too, and you can feel once you start to break through. There we go. Now that was really good because it just barely had to peel that apart. So now we are starting to get the wire out. Grab a hold of that, and pull that out of the way, and we'll just trim off this excess here. All right, just like so. Now, we've got plenty enough to cover the splices, plus have a little bit extra to work with, so I think that that's just fine. Let's use this to trim off these little legs here. Okay, now that we've got the wire exposed, we just want to use the strippers to peel this back a bit. And you really only want to go just a couple inches, or just about 1/2 of an inch or less. And just like so. And I'll actually, before I do all these, I'll bust open this splice here and kind of show you. So the wire, it just goes into this butt splice here, and it goes about halfway. So the goal is to strip back just enough material to where it goes about that deep into the butt splice, and goes essentially as far as it can go. So I'll overstrip these just a little bit, and then I'll trim them all to length to make sure that they're all a uniform length. So I'll get these other 3 done here. And then what I like to do to make sure that the wire and everything stays in good shape is I'll give it a good twist just to keep everything nice and tight. And then now we'll go ahead and do our trim on these. And again, we just want it to be about that long. So I'll take and trim the first one and double check it. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, so now I'll just make the rest match that first one. So this first one here. And that one's a little long. And last but not least. All right, so those all look relatively good and even. So the other end we've got to worry about is the end that's coming up out of the well. So we've got these wires coming up out of the well, and this is what we're going to be connecting the, well, in this case we're connecting the motor to the drop cable. So this is actually a motor I've got sitting right over here, and we'll splice these two together. So I'll move this guy out of the way for just a second since it's trying to run away anyways, and get these ones into essentially the same shape that the other ones were in. There we go. Now again, I'll twist all these ones to make sure we keep the wires in good shape. That kind of helps to keep everything nice and tidy. So these will all trim to about the same length as the other ones. All right, so now the most important step before you start actually putting the two wire connections together, and this step will cost you, is you want to make sure that you remember to put, let's get these little guys out of here. There's our 4 butt splices. You want to remember to put the heat shrink tube on before you start connecting your butt splices. Let's just say been there, done, forgot that once or twice. And that's never any fun. So you make sure you put your tubing over your wires long before you start crimping. So now we're to that point, and we can actually start crimping these ends on. So one end at a time. You throw that on there, cue up the crimping tool, squeeze down. I always give a good tug on the end of those to make sure that you got a nice seat on that, and move on to the next one. Now, I mentioned using the crimping tool because it's important to use it, because if you look at the way that it closes, it doesn't actually close all the way. So unlike a cutter, you minimize the risk of damaging the wire when you do the crimp. But at the same time, you get a nice strong connection. So neither of those pulled off, and that works pretty well. I've seen people use like the cutter on your strippers, or just a cutter on like a pair of needle nose or something, but you know, that works, and in a pinch you can use that, but I don't recommend it. If you've got the right tool, you may as well use it, just because it's just best practice, and that's what the tool's for. So, all right, I checked that one's on nice and tight. Now we'll get the last one here to ground. Okay, so now we've got all 4 of these on, our heat shrink tubes are on, and we can go ahead and connect this up to the motor. Now, of course, it's important to match color for color. Otherwise, you may not get the desired effect when you turn the breaker on, or, you know, the effect that you're going for. Here, let me rearrange. Okay, so shove that in there. Now the splice kit that I used, it is rated for size 14, 12, and 10 wire, which is why it's perfectly acceptable for me to be connecting this 14 wire to this 12 wire. Now you may be wondering, well, why are you hooking 14 wire to 12 wire? And that's because you get voltage drop that occurs over the distance of the line. So to compensate for that voltage drop, you run larger wire, and thus you get less drop in voltage. So that essentially just translates to the motor getting the voltage that it needs so that it can operate properly. All right, finishing these up here. Sometimes can be a little rascally. Again, I always go back and tug on those. I know I'm beating a dead horse by saying it every time, but it's important because you want to make sure that this splice is done with the greatest level of accuracy that you can, because once this is done, it's going down the well. And a lot of times there's specialized equipment that you need to get this pump back out of the well. So you only want to do it once. All right, so now we're gonna be able to start heating this heat shrink up, and I always move the wires out of the way as much as I can, center that heat shrink, and then I'll start the heating process. And so with the torch, it's gonna be really hot, so you're gonna wanna hold it at about this far away and move closer until you start to see it react with the tube. And then you wanna keep it moving as you're heating it up so that you don't heat one spot and burn it. And eventually you're gonna see everything just shrink up, and then the special inside of this, which is a sealant, is gonna heat up and start oozing out the ends. So I'll start torching it. All right, so if you couldn't tell from the video, I focused on the center with the heat. I focused on the center first, and then started to work my way out to the edges, to the outside edges. Now I can heat this just a little bit more to get it to actually start oozing. I like to really get it hot. All right, well, I can definitely tell that we're starting to get a little bit of ooze coming out of it. She's nice and hot. That means that we seated it really well. And now by starting in the center and shrinking it and then working our way out, we're eliminating any air pockets that can occur inside the splice. So now, while that one cools, we'll move on to the next one. So you can see when I get the flame too close to it, it will start to flame up a little bit. But if you just do that a little bit, you're not going to cause any problems with the splice. It's if you really start to light it up that you're going to start running into any problems. So on to the next one here. And they'll kind of try to stick together, which isn't really the end of the world, but if it's still really soft, it can kind of warp the splice or peel it back. So you try to kind of keep control of all the individual wires as best you can. All right, that one looks good. We'll move on to the last one here. Kind of just let that cool a little bit before it settles in with its buddies. There we go. Center that up. All right, so now all 4 of those are looking good. And we've got that splice completed. And you can tell that the wires didn't get burned. This is just a little bit of gumminess from the electrical tape that was on these wires previously. So we've got the wires all spliced, and you can tell that it was a good splice because there's no apparent air bubbles. And we've got the stuff oozing out. These are still pretty hot. We've got the spliced material, or the special inside material that kind of oozes out and creates that really strong seal. So we'll let those cool for a couple minutes here, and we'll finish up. Thanks for joining me today on doing an underwater splice. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great content. We'll see you next time.